So what are we here for? Well, recently I have been on a journey. I have been exploring LiveViewNative. I have come in as a somewhat outsider to that ecosystem and have been working closely with the internal team to better understand the ecosystem. And the purpose of this talk is to share some of that experience with you. And it's also to give you some of the tools that you need to get started for yourself. So a little bit about me before we jump into the meat of the talk. My name is Brooklin Myers. I'm the instructor at Dockyard Academy. I'm also the host of the Elixir and LiveView podcast. And at the time of writing this talk, I was not a LiveViewNative core team member, so the perspective of this is going to be very much coming in with fresh eyes and understanding the ecosystem as a newbie, but have since been promoted internally and am now part of the LiveViewNative core team. And my task over the next few months is going to be focusing on improving the onboarding experience for LiveViewNative. So I'm incredibly excited for that opportunity. I love building projects. Whenever I want to learn something new, rather than diving into documentation or reading our books, I try to get started straight away with building something. And so the focus of this talk is not going to be the project that I built to learn LiveViewNative, but I do really enjoy both the act of teaching and the act of building as a way of exploring something new. And so to learn more about LiveViewNative, I built out a multiplayer game, which for legal reasons is called Mix 4, a game in which you connect 4 pieces together, so it is a Connect 4 clone. It was a fantastic use case for LiveViewNative because it leverages a lot of the benefits of OTP and that ecosystem. So it was very straightforward to build out player monitoring, so monitoring the state of the various players in the game through things like presence, as well as building out real-time multiplayer features using PubSub. And what was really amazing about LiveViewNative was it enabled me to build a cross-platform experience that had complete feature parity between both the web and native. I am an instructor, so I love questions. And these are classically known as the 7 WH questions. You've heard these before. These are the who, what, where, when, why, which, and how of LiveViewNative. And this is exactly the type of fib that we love to tell as teachers in order to help students gain a simplified understanding of things, in order to make it more concise and understandable. We'll often tell very small fibs and avoid things like it depends and edge cases and extra details that can just distract away from the core points. So I am going to be doing that throughout this talk for the sake of making things more concise and more understandable. This is my first fib. There are far more than 2 people involved with LiveViewNative. I have some pictures of the rest of the core team. There are lots of folks who have been involved. Brian, in his talk yesterday, made an excellent shout out to many of the folks involved with LiveViewNative, but I did have to give special thanks to Carson and May, without whom this talk would not have been possible. They are 2 incredible people, both from a technical perspective and just from working with. So if you're getting involved in LiveViewNative, chances are you're going to interact with these 2. And it's always good to know that when you're diving into a new community, that there are going to be people there who are kind and supportive. So if you're raising issues, chances are you're going to interact with one of these 2. Carson is here, by the way. He understands the technical side of LiveViewNative far better than me. So if there are any technical questions that go over my head, I am going to be pointing in his direction and getting him to answer. So what? What is LiveViewNative? Again, this is an oversimplified explanation, but LiveViewNative is essentially 2 things right now. There is a core LiveViewNative repository. This is a platform-agnostic repository for building LiveViewNative applications. As we continue to expand out to more platforms, this is going to be the core that makes all of that possible. Then there's another repository specifically for SwiftUI. And this is where all of the iOS-specific code lives. So if you're exploring LiveViewNative, there might be some confusion of like which of these repositories should I be looking at. Most things are on core, and much of the documentation is on core, but we're going to go into some of the different areas that you can explore when you're diving into this. When? So this has been incredibly exciting. LiveViewNative has put out the official 0.1 release. While I was preparing for this talk, it was in very much an experimental beta, still using the main branch for development, but 0.1 has been put out. It is ready for people to build applications with. I want to put a slight asterisk on this. I think there is still a lot of work to do, and this is going to be my task over the next few months to improve the onboarding experience. So right now, I think that the internal team at Dockyard has the ability to create production-level applications with LiveViewNative, but there's still some work to be done to make it more easy and understandable to get into the ecosystem. So things like more cohesive tutorials, unifying our documentation. One of the experiences I had while diving into this was that a lot of the information felt scattered. As someone who's not particularly familiar with things like Apple documentation, I found I had to go to many different places to find the information I needed. So in the coming weeks and months, that information is going to be unified and made a lot easier for people to get into. I also do want to let people know that LiveViewNative is still experimental, so it will likely see rapid evolution and changes. Pretty much every day that I've been preparing for this talk, there's been something new, something exciting coming out. So if you're the type of person who really enjoys being on the bleeding edge of technology, if you want to be an early adopter and see where things began in hindsight and where things go, now is a really exciting time to get involved. Okay. Last year, I think LiveViewNative made a promise that they were going to deliver a mountain. This portion of the talk was somewhat inspired, by the way, by Savannah's excellent talk of her journey going from working with starting, I should say, a climbing company and transitioning into software development. So LiveViewNative has made the mountain. It's there to climb. And if you're an explorer, now is a fantastic time to get involved. What it needs, though, is we need anchoring points. We can't all be Alex Honnold free soloing the El Capitan, Yosemite Valley. We need some safety guards, we need tutorials, we need more information on that side. So that's going to be, I think, the next big focus is making this approachable. So where is LiveViewNative right now? I think this question has already been addressed, but I'll talk a little bit more about it. So it's currently on iOS. You can deliver LiveViewNative applications with Swift UI, and this means it can go to a variety of different iOS targets. In the future, and this is actively in development from my understanding, we have Nelson, who is working on the Android side of things. So it's also going to be expanded out to that platform. When? Soon. I'm going to steal Brian's answer and say soon and not give any specific promises. But it's really great to see that this is actively in development, and it's an important priority for the team. In the less near future, what's really incredible about LiveViewNative is the way that it's being built to be platform agnostic is it's going to allow us to expand out the Elixir ecosystem into a variety of different platforms. And so there's been proof of concepts for things like Windows, things like Unity, and really it has the potential to run essentially anywhere. So I'm really excited to see in the coming years where this winds up being. I think there's a lot of interesting opportunity there. And why? Why LiveViewNative? Why not use something more classical? Why not use React Native? Well, the answer to that question, I think, is the same answer as when you ask, why use Phoenix? Why use LiveView? Why use OTP? If you're already sold on the benefits of the Beam, if you're already convinced that that is something that helps you build applications, then where you're delivering those applications really has no impact on that answer. So if you're already convinced by that, then I think the answer to why use LiveViewNative is transparent. Some of the things that it will enable you specifically as a LiveView developer to do, though, is it'll allow you to expand your application, your existing Phoenix and LiveView application, to mobile and native. So if you're building out a Phoenix app and it becomes a business requirement that you want to build out a native application, this right now, I think, is a very daunting task. It would require building out a completely separate front end. It would require, essentially, you don't get to reuse a lot of your back-end logic. You're going to have to create that specifically for your mobile application. And so this is going to create a much more integrated system if you want to build out a native application. So if you've been thinking about mobile, this is going to be a way that enables you to do that. One of the things that I'm the most excited about for LiveViewNative as an instructor is that this has the potential to really expand out the Elixir ecosystem. I think this is something that's going to give us long-term stability. So it expands the number of things we can build with Elixir. And as an instructor, I'm really excited that it's going to provide more opportunities for Elixir devs. One of the things we often see in different ecosystems, let's take JavaScript as an example, is we often see that new developers get their start in programming through the front end. And so this is going to provide similar opportunities for new developers to join teams and build out native experiences, get their foot in the door. Because right now, one of the largest complaints I see from companies considering working in Elixir is that it's hard to find Elixir developers. One of the answers to that, I think, is somewhat unsatisfying personally. You often hear well, you can hire from an external ecosystem and then make them into Elixir developers. I absolutely think that companies should do this, but I don't think it's a complete answer. While I see companies complaining about not finding developers, I also see them essentially saying that they aren't yet considering hiring new developers. This is a lot like saying, well, we only want adults, but we don't want to have any babies. I don't think it works. And so we need to create these opportunities for new developers to get their foot in the door in the ecosystem, and this has the potential to do that, which is going to open the door to new Elixir developers. This is what happens when you say something and then don't hit your slide in time. So which? This was probably the most awkward one to fit in. Sometimes you pick a theme and you kind of go, well, I'll fit something in here. Which types of applications can we build in LiveViewNative? Well, if you are building something, anything that needs to be real-time, distributed, essentially any application that would benefit from OTP in the Beam, then that's going to be a good fit for LiveViewNative. Or, like I said, if you're expanding your system out. So we do have demonstration projects available. Brian has already talked about the ElixirConf chess app. I have the Mix4 application published, and then there's also the ElixirConf chat app. So if you're looking for example projects and looking to see how are people working with LiveViewNative, then these are currently some of the projects that are available. I do hope to see in the coming days, weeks, months, years, that lots of folks are going to be bringing new projects to LiveViewNative, and we're going to expand out what we have available. People writing tutorials, people writing content, people creating within this space. I think that the LiveViewNative community is going to grow in a really big way over the next year. I did promise I'd talk a bit about documentation. So if you're hoping to get into LiveViewNative right now, these are the 3 main places that you should go, the core docs being the first. So May put in some phenomenal work to make a cohesive tutorial, something that we're going to go through in a moment. And if you're looking for things like how do you build out specifically SwiftUI designs, and there is LiveViewNative documentation for that. SwiftUI, like I said, I think there are a few too many places to go to right now. So part of my goal is going to be unifying this and hopefully shrinking this down so that there's fewer places that developers have to go, and so that the experience is more akin to what we've come to expect as Elixir developers working through things like hex docs, so that I don't need to look at Apple documentation anymore. How? We're going to go through a brief overview of how LiveViewNative works and talk about how you can begin to get started with it. I know many folks have had the experience of trying out LiveViewNative, not getting to go through the tutorial, and this is unfortunately just due to the nature of it being very rapid development and things changing. And so that, I think, is going to stabilize. But let's talk a bit about how. So there's two main applications. You have your traditional Phoenix application, and then you also have your iOS application that is run with Xcode. The iOS app side is going to be very, very minimal. There's essentially just some very thin, lightweight boilerplate that we need to set up, and that's going to be inside of what is called the content view. And inside of the content view, we set up a SwiftUI LiveView. This is a SwiftUI component that essentially directs to the Phoenix application, points to localhost, and then allows you to write everything on the Phoenix side. On the Phoenix side, we have a platform-specific render, and this is going to render out your specific view for your native application. You write a different platform-specific render for each platform. Right now, that means writing out a render function for SwiftUI, and in the future, that's going to mean writing out more render functions for each platform. But everything else is shared Phoenix. So you have your normal event bindings, you have everything that you're used to in Phoenix and LiveView is going to remain the same. The only thing that is kind of the learning curve to LiveViewNative is learning how to build out these SwiftUI views. So we're going to go through a quick start. There are some prerequisites that I'm not going to go into the depths of because I think there's great tutorials out there already. But you are going to need Xcode, Elixir, and Phoenix to get started with this. We're going to walk through setting up the Xcode project, and then we're going to set up the Phoenix project with LiveViewNative and go through some of the configuration of that, and essentially walk through how can you just get this started. So after this talk, you're going to have the tools you need to make a LiveViewNative application. So this is Xcode. The moment you open it, you have the ability to create a new project. This part, we're just creating a new Xcode project. We have a little bit of options here. So we're picking the iOS application, picking the app option, and then hitting next. Options for the project, I actually ran into problems with this. This is one of the kind of stumbling blocks I found when I was getting into this, was I'd picked the wrong interface and language, so you do need to make sure that you pick SwiftUI and that you pick Swift. I know that's a fairly straightforward mistake in hindsight, but I think these little bumps in the road can be the kind of things that make it harder to adopt. Same thing, make sure your Xcode version is up to date. I had been using an older version, so I also experienced some struggles there. So just a little bit of house cleaning to make sure that this experience is smooth. There's also some hesitancy sometimes of, should you use core data? Do you need to include tests? For just scaffolding the application, it's not necessary. But if you know more about the SwiftUI side and you want those things, you can absolutely include them. Fairly straightforward view. We're just creating a folder for this. And then in the iOS app, we need to add the LiveViewNative package. So we go to File, Add Packages, and then we can search for the LiveView client SwiftUI project. We add that project into our iOS application, and that's what gives us access to the SwiftUI LiveView that we're going to put inside of the content view. We pick the LiveViewNative package. We don't need the built-in registry generator. And then inside of our content view, there's a tiny little bit of boilerplate. So what we're looking at here is we added import LiveViewNative, and we changed the body of the content view. So on line 13, that's the code that we add. That's it, just the one line. We add LiveView, and then we point it to localhost. So work was put in to make sure that this experience was significantly streamlined. You may see some outdated tutorials until we pull them down, which should happen soon. that use a different version of this, but this has been greatly simplified. You also can see some information about the preview after line 17. That is not strictly necessary. That's just something that comes out of the box and it allows you to preview your iOS application. So it's not necessary, but you can include it. And then we go through the steps of setting up the Phoenix project. So we mix Phoenix new up our application. We install our dependencies in our mix file. And then May has put in great work making it easier to set up the configuration. So you can just run the command mix LiveViewNative.install, and that will set up some configuration for you. You can also do this manually if you're adding it to an existing project. The hex docs have a really streamlined tutorial on this. And then we start up our server. Of course, if you're using a database, I'm skipping the step of setting up Ecto. But these are things that hopefully, if you're already familiar with Phoenix, then that part should not be the difficulty. And this is what it's like to write in LiveViewNative. So you set up your live route the same way that you have before, if you're already working with LiveView. And then you make your platform-specific render. Everything else is the same. So we do see some different syntax here. You see things like vstack and text. So we're essentially taking the syntax of SwiftUI and making it a little bit more Elixir-ish, making it feel more like we're working with components for the sake of making the experience more comfortable. But it does have essentially complete parity with SwiftUI. I think the number that Brian used was 99%, and that's been my experience. Is whenever I find documentation on how to use something in SwiftUI, I can essentially just translate that into the slightly different syntax. I do want to call out, this is probably not going to be a bug for anyone who's listening to this recording because I anticipate this to be solved in the coming weeks. But there is currently a bug on line 2. I'm using use my app web with the LiveView option. There's currently a bug due to layouts where this can cause issues, so the documentation has you use Phoenix.LiveView. That's not a complete solution because if you want things like core components, then you do need to use your LiveView option coming from your app web. And if you want to get around that, there's ways of doing that. Happy to go into some of that. Essentially, you just need to remove some of the layout information. But I don't want to go too deep into that because I think there's going to be a much cleaner solution for this very shortly. And that's it. Now we're going to start up the iOS simulator and start the server. And there we go. We're building on web. We're building on native. As mentioned, there's one-to-one element parity with SwiftUI. So if you're looking at SwiftUI code, you can translate it into LiveViewNative. This is the area that I think needs more education and information around. This was the area that I found the most tricky to get into. It's also where the learning curve exists. But this is going to be, any sharp edges that are there are going to be rounded out. I think that this is going to be significantly simplified. There's also a lot of rapid iteration on improving this. So I would love to hear folks' thoughts and feedback on this syntax, if they like using it. We've seen the new syntax with mod classes in Brian's talk. And so I think there's going to be a lot of experimentation and development in this area to make this experience feel smooth. That's it. The rest is just Phoenix. So we have all of the event bindings that we've gotten used to. We have the ability to use our handlers. You can even share these between your native application and your web application. So you have the same navigation. You have things like push navigate and push patch, and the ability to not have to rely on some of the SwiftUI tools for navigation. You can use the navigation that you've come to be familiar with in LiveView. This blew my brain. This was one of the things I was the most excited about when I started getting into LiveViewNative. I love testing. I'm borderline TDD cult level testing person. This is the way. And what I loved was that I had the ability to use all the same patterns that I've become familiar with when testing LiveViewNative. So there's one small piece of syntax here that might be unfamiliar, which is we do need to say what is our target platform. So we set the platform as Swift UI. I'm going to show some examples that may simplify this as well. And then you mount your LiveView. You have the ability to use things like render click and all the different assertions, and you can test it like it is just a LiveView with different render code, which I thought was really incredible. So this has been an area of experimentation for myself. I want to improve some of the syntax around this. This is not part of LiveViewNative yet. This is something that I'm considering proposing to the team, and I'm far more confident in the first example than the second. So the first example I like because it's essentially what it's doing. It's using test attributes to obfuscate and hide the need to set the platform ID, because that's an implementation detail that I don't think the developers should be concerned about. We should have the ability to say, here's the platform that my test is going to run on. I'm going to mount my LiveView. Here's the things that I should find in the page. Here's the interactions that I want to make. The next example, I really don't know if it's a good idea. So where this came about was as I was building out the application, I did want my web and my native view to be fundamentally the same. I wanted complete feature parity. So for me, that meant writing the same tests twice. I am very lazy. I don't want to have to do that. And so I wrote a macro called cross-platform test that allows you to specify the platforms you want your test to run on, and it will just run the test on those different platforms. Now, some of the pushback on this, I think, has been very valid, that if you have this test and you're writing tests for two different platforms, chances are you probably want those to be independent at scale. And the reason this works is because it's a smaller scale application. But I don't know. I really want more feedback and thoughts on whether or not this is something that people would benefit from, or if it's going to create nightmare and headache. Right now, it just hasn't existed long enough to be sure. But it is very cool to know that it's possible. Okay. So I want to circle back to the purpose of this talk. I have been climbing this mountain. I won't say solo, because the LiveViewNative team has been an incredible support, but it's getting lonely. I want to climb with other people, and I would love to invite you all to come explore LiveViewNative together. That is the purpose. That is my talk. If you have any questions, I hope that you come speak with me after, and I want to thank all of you so much for having me. Okay, all right, so this is the Mix4 application. What it's going to demonstrate is we have 3 different clients. There are 2 on the web, 1 on native, and it's using presence to monitor when players join into the system. So we're going to see the 2 web players join in, and we're going to see that appear on the native side. The 2 players on the right are going to begin a game with each other. So that's using PubSub to have real-time updates, and we'll see all the moves occur in real time. So let's watch that. We're joining in. We can see our players online. All of these are generated names by Faker. Both players request to play, and they're matched with each other. They have 20 seconds, so we can see there is a simultaneous counter occurring. Not the best strategy video for Connect 4, unfortunately, but it does serve demo purposes. And we're going to see that due to going first here, our LiveViewNative player has the advantage, and they win. You'll also notice the third view on the left has been updating to show the status of the other players. So as they exit, that updates as well. Now they want to rematch, so they can specifically request to play with each other, join into the game, and hopefully our web player has a slightly better strategy this time. No, it looks like we're just going to keep going up 4, but our native player has made a mistake due to clicking in the wrong location. They have the advantage. There we go. That is something. Folks on the Dockyard team know that I barely sleep as it is. So the fact that I could build something like this in what is the sliver of my spare time was really phenomenal. I could not have accomplished this without LiveViewNative. It was a wonderful experience to develop with. So really grateful to that team for making this possible.